The reason that now the AfD is considered right-wing extremist is not because they're trying to build a different kind of democracy. It's because they're promoting this idea that we have first-class and second-class citizens. They were not trying to just prove that the AfD is right-wing extremist. They also did look for counter-arguments. In our constitution, it does say that there should be a last resort if we see that a political party is actively working against our constitution.
Alternative for Deustchland is now officially considered a confirmed right-wing extremist endeavor whose goals are contrary to the German constitution. That's according to the German Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, or BfV, the intelligence agency that is in charge of safeguarding German democracy by keeping track of all kinds of terrorist groups and extremist organizations, both foreign and domestic, which sometimes includes political parties. To its critics, though, the BfV is a politically motivated authoritarian branch of a government using it to silence the largest opposition party in the country. But the BfV's label of the AfD as far-right extremist, which comes at the tail end of a years-long investigation into the party, is neither sufficient nor necessary to ban the AfD, though it has added fuel to that debate. In 2023, revelations by the website Correctiv about a secret strategy meeting between AfD politicians and neo-Nazis sparked nationwide protests to ban the party. And that article was referenced in the BfV's report. The process of banning a political party in Germany, however, is long and complicated, with a ton of safeguards to protect the rights of that party and prevent possible abuses by a would-be authoritarian government. To talk about the BfV's investigation, the debate around banning the AfD, and what that process would look like moving forward, we sat down with Marie Bröckling, a journalist at Correctiv who specializes on the debate to ban the AfD. Thank you so much for speaking to me. After a 3-year investigation, the BfV declared that the AfD is a confirmed right-wing extremist endeavor. What does this mean, and why does it matter?
So they didn't publish. It was leaked, the whole report, where the BfV explained how they came to this conclusion. And what I thought was really striking about the whole report was that it became really clear that at this point, the BfV has no doubt that the whole party is moving in this extremist direction. So in their previous report 3 years ago, they did state that there are still groups and parts within the AfD that were trying to work to go back to maybe this more liberal, conservative part of the endeavor. And now that is no longer the case. The whole AfD is moving towards this right extremist goals. And that is what I think is the most striking. Because the AfD was not founded as a far-right party. It was founded by more of a neoliberal, Bernd Lücke. If you think back, really their first main topic was the euro. Mm-hmm. It was about the currency, right? So it was a completely different party back then, yeah.
And now there are some figures within the party, Björn Höcke, Alexander Gauland, Maximilian Krah, there's a few others, that some people say these are extremist figures within the party. They don't represent what the party stands for.
And that is what the BfV, the intelligence office, is now disputing. They are saying it's no longer just these extremist figures that you just named. It's throughout the whole party that people agree and promote such, for example, anti-Muslim sentiments. So if you look at the whole report, the more than 1,000 pages, you can see how they really, they would cite this really small, rural area office of the AfD, where people would promote the same sentiment as Björn Höcke at the top of the party, and it goes through all levels.
There's a lot of information that's already in the public record. People have been talking about the AfD for years at this point, even before the investigation started. Is there anything that's new fundamentally in these 1,000 pages of the reports, or are they just connecting things that were already out there? Is there anything that surprised you in it?
I would say really it's really more connecting the dots. Because if you look at this report, at least the version that was now leaked, it's mostly already public information that they cite. So there's no obvious intelligence in there that they would have gathered through race other than OSINT or even journalistic work, really. So what is interesting about the report is really just the sheer mass of it. I think nobody has ever done this work to collect so many quotes and so many different elements and sources to see where the AfD is moving. And what I think is also important to highlight, if you look at this report, they were not trying to just prove that the AfD is right-wing extremist. They also did look for counter-arguments. So there are really parts in the report where they're like, so here somebody said something different. Alice Weidel said she didn't mean it this way, and she like meant something completely different. And then they would like really look into the arguments and be like, does this hold? Does this stand? Is this plausible? Does she actually try to make a different point, or is it just a facade?
And Alice Weidel is the co-leader of the party. She's often pointed to as proof that the AfD can't be extremist because she's gay, she's married to someone of foreign origin is often the thing that people point to. Do you think that's relevant for us as the public to take into account?
It's often discussed, but honestly, I think it's not the main point, right? The main point is they are politicians, and what we should look into and what we should focus on is where are they trying to get? If they would get into power, if they would get to lead the coalition, what would they do? And that's the main question that I'm interested in.
How do they define right-wing extremist endeavor?
They do provide really long definitions in the beginning. And at this point, what the BFV does, and because they already know that the AfD is going to go to court with this, right? Which is their right, and they should be able to do this, right? Nobody should just be claimed to be right-wing extremist and then just be stuck with it, right? They can go in court, and they did already. And so what the BFV did, and I guess this was kind of like a preventive measure on their side, was they did use a definition that was already laid out by courts in previous cases. It says you're right-wing extremist if your endeavor is not in line with the constitution in Germany. And so what the issue is, or what the struggle was in previous cases, was how do we spell out what's part of our constitution? What's the essence of our constitution? And so they came up with 3 dimensions of what this would mean. And one of them is basic human dignity. Mm-hmm. One of them is the legal system. And one of them is a democratic system. And those are the 3 main dimensions that they say are the essence of our constitution. And of course, there's freedom of opinion, but those are just basic principles that cannot and should not be questioned or like worked against.
Human dignity, legal system, democratic system.
Yeah.
How does the AfD fail in all 3 of these categories?
It does not. It does not fail in all 3 of the categories according to the BFV. So what the BFV found in their report, or what they stated, was that the AfD most very clearly, and they say 100% through all levels of the AfD, fails in the category of human dignity. Mm-hmm. That's where they say they really come to the conclusion that the AfD does not accept that each citizen in Germany has the same rights as per our constitution. That the AfD is trying to move, or does hold this belief, that we have first-class and second-class citizens. And for example, that they're really promoting this idea that there's somehow this like essential German identity that only some people carry and other people cannot. And that's just not how our constitution works, because as per our constitution, if you have German citizenship, you're a German citizen. There is no first class and second class German. So that is one point that the BFV found, where the AfD is really not in line with our constitution. One of the main reasons that they draw the conclusion that they are right-wing extremist endeavor. For the second and third dimension, the legal system and the democratic system, they do say that they have some doubt if the AfD is fully in line with this, but they do not come to the conclusion that the AfD is actively working against this or trying to promote things that on all levels of the AfD that are not in line with these dimensions. For example, they do cite Björn Höcke, where he kind of like questions if the legal system in Germany is independent. He suggests that all the major courts are kind of controlled by the government. And those kinds of quotes the BFV argues are not just part of freedom of opinion, because it's not just an opinion that you can or cannot hold. They do argue that this kind of like dissolves the general trust in the legal system and the general public. And that is very dangerous to our constitution if people no longer trust the legal system.
And on the democratic system?
And on the democratic system, it's similar. They kind of like they gather all these quotes where the AfD politicians would say something like, "Oh, everything is controlled by globalist, kind of like anti-Semitic sentiments sometimes also, or by the US even, or all our politicians are just told what to do by other foreign powers. Germany is not even a state, it's just kind of like a business run by a group of people." So these kind of quotes are gathered in the BFV report. And then still they draw the conclusion, they're like, this is questionable, but we do not draw the conclusion that these thoughts are shared by anyone in the AfD and that they're like the essence of the AfD. Whereas with the human dignity, like these first-class and second-class citizens, that's something where the BFV draws a conclusion that this, at this point, really makes it's characteristic of the AfD. It's not just one line of thought within the party. It's really their main essence, that they're really trying to promote this idea that not all citizens are the same and that some people cannot and should not belong to this country.
Like paper citizens or passport.
Oh yeah, that's one
citizens.
passport citizens. It's one very one term that they use all the time. Also, remigration is a term that's also cited in the BFV report that they've used a lot. A term that used to be neutral, right? It used to just describe people migrating, but they've really used this term in a sense of suggesting that a whole lot of people need or should leave Germany.
Remigration is a term that really came to prominence thanks to the work of Correctiv. Especially Correctiv's reports on the Potsdam meeting from late 2023 sparked a wave of protests throughout Germany to ban the AfD. And that report has come under a lot of fire. Do you think it's had an impact on the BFV investigation? And do you feel like the BFV's declaration and reports vindicated Correctiv's work?
So the BFV does cite this report, or at least the reactions to it. I think the BFV, if I remember correctly, mostly looks into how the AfD itself responded to the report. What I thought was interesting is that the BFV really supports or draws the same conclusion as Correctiv did already a year earlier, that remigration is a right-wing extremist term. That what they mean is really not having millions of people in this country. And they prove this with all these quotes where people repeatedly suggest that remigration should be a major endeavor, that it's not just about not allowing asylum seekers to come to Germany, that it's about a lot more people who should, according to the AfD, not be in this country. Because this was disputed before, right? Or it was questioned, like some people did come out and was like, no, remigration is just a neutral term, it doesn't necessarily have to mean this. But the BFV does draw a different conclusion at this point.
I think you caught yourself there, and you were going to say they want to get rid of, and then you stopped yourself and you said not have. In some cases, they do want to get rid. There was talks of just mass deportations. I believe the Correctiv report had 3 categories that were mentioned. There were asylum seekers and refugees. There were legal residents who aren't citizens of Germany but have a residence permit, and then there are dual citizens or people with a migrant background but have German citizenship. The case that was most disputed was how the AfD deals with dual citizens. What conclusion do they draw about the way that the AfD defended those statements or those policies that they seem to have? I
remember one very particular quote where I think it was Björn Höcke also did say publicly, oh, we did not, that's not what we meant. We just meant, of course, like policies that are in line with the Constitution. That could just be like people who don't have a right to stay in Germany anyway, that we just want to deport those, which would be, of course, a completely legitimate thing to do and a very plausible thing to say as a politician in public as well. But then the BFV reports says that just a few weeks later, he did give an interview to a right-wing media outlet, and to them he explained that he just said that publicly to make sure that they wouldn't get into trouble, because he knows that this can be quite dangerous. So I think that was a really telling part, right? Like if you look at these quotes, what they say in the general public and then what they say in their own circles, that the BFV really comes to the conclusion that at this point, remigration is not a neutral term. It does not mean just deporting people who don't have a right to stay. It obviously means more than that, and it's a term that they use on purpose because they know it resonates with people in these right-wing communities.
That idea of saying something publicly and then saying the opposite also publicly, but through friendly media is crazy to me, because the Potsdam meeting was behind closed doors. Those statements, those quotes, that meeting was not supposed to come out. But that interview was the second interview where Björn Höcke contradicted himself from the previous one. What are they thinking when they're doing that?
I can't tell you. But I think that doesn't happen often. It's very few cases where we've seen these public statements in two directions. Mostly, and I mean, that's the work that so many journalists have been doing for years, is really trying, and that's something that the BFV report also says, the AfD in this term is very different from previous right-wing extremist parties that we've had in Germany.
Okay, there's a really important point coming up here, but first, really quick. I'm actually packing right now for a project we've been planning for more than a year, and it's gonna involve me being mostly off the grid for a month and a half and more traveling after that. Initially, we were supposed to do this project in partnership with a media company that was going to fund the whole thing. But even though that deal fell apart, we're still trying to make it happen with basically zero budget apart from the little we're getting from YouTube and Patreon subscriptions, which is not enough at the moment for a project this ambitious. So if you like the kind of journalism we do here at Barely Informed and you want to support us, the best way you can do that is through Patreon or YouTube memberships or individual donations like YouTube Super Thanks. Because the goal here is to bring you independent, in-depth journalism from the places where important stories are happening, and that is simply not doable without your support. So if you already support us or you're considering joining our Patreon, thank you so much, and if you can't afford to, that's okay. You can always leave a like and comment and subscribe to the channel. And now back to the interview. The last time a party was considered to be banned was the NPD,
right,
which still exists now as the Heimat, which we'll get into the fact that they weren't banned. How would you compare the AfD to a party like the NPD?
So what both the court and the BFV office said in terms of comparing the NPD and the AfD is that they're so different in how blunt they are. The NPD, you really just had to look at the party program and you knew what they were all about. There's very little doubt if they were right-wing extremists. They're really open about this. Whereas the AfD, and this is also something the BFV report says, it's a lot more, you have to look a lot more behind what they might actually mean and what they want to say. And it's very obvious that they have very good legal counsel, because at this point they're really careful with their wording. They often know just about what to say and what they can't say. I think one example was where there's this term that was used in Nazi Germany that is banned. You can't repeat these slogans. And the AfD just did a little twist on it. So it was just about that they can say it publicly without it being a crime. So they would say Alles for Deutschland, which means the party leader Alice Weidel for Germany. It's just like, it sounds, phonetically, it just sounds so similar to the slogan that is banned.
Yeah.
So you know what they're trying to do, but you can't then hold them legally accountable for it.
And they have it on like giant campaign banners, of course.
Oh yeah, it was a major slogan for their election campaign. Yeah.
And Björn Höcke was convicted twice for using the banned version, Alles für Deutschland. So do you think that Alles für Deutschland is on purpose?
Oh, of course, yeah. Oh yeah. I think there's no doubt that they do it on purpose. It's a provocation, right? They're trying to provoke.
So we talked about the possibility of the AfD being banned. Of course, in the case of the NPD, when that court case happened, they decided that it was not worth doing it because they were too insignificant. And now the exact opposite reasoning is happening for the AfD. It would be undemocratic to ban them because there are so many people who vote for them who would be disenfranchised.
Well, the court hasn't said that. It's just like an expectation that some people have said.
It's an argument that is used by politicians and by people in the public to justify not banning them. Mm-hmm. When is the right time then? It seems like it's never the correct time to ban a party.
I mean, the first question really is, should we ever ban a political party? And I think that's a major discussion that we are having right now in the general public, which I think is good to have. It's important that we discuss these things. Because that's really, I mean, should we or should we not? It's a very strong measure to take. Just banning a whole political party. It's a party that's been built up over years. People voted for them. I mean, what will happen to all the voters? Millions of people who might say, oh, well, then I don't need to vote anyway. If the party I voted for now, they ban it, why would I take part in the whole election anyway, if my voice is not being heard? So there are politicians and there are parts of the public who say maybe you should never use it. I mean, it is part of our constitution. In our constitution, it does say, and I mean, this also draws partly of our history, of the German experience as Nazi Germany, that there should be a last resort if we see that a political party is actively working against our constitution, that we should have measures to confront them. But then, yeah, I think there's no final answer. Everybody has to find the answer within themselves.
It is a complicated question. Like the idea of, first of all, the idea of a democracy doesn't really exist as a thing. It is like there's as many models of democracy as there have been democracies, and everyone has a different system, is trying to solve for different problems. There's federal systems, there's constitutional monarchies, there's parliamentary systems, there's different ways of counting votes even. And the fact is that democracies are inherently kind of fragile and unstable because we never know what kind of circumstances can lead people to vote.
Although historically they're more stable than other political systems, but yeah.
If we're looking at the history of the last couple of centuries, sure, but like
recently not so much.
Well, recently of the last few decades, not so much, but in terms of the grand scope of history, there haven't been democracies for much of human history. It's kind of something that kind of pops up as an exception among dictatorships and other kinds of like empires and monarchies and all of that. We are seeing a global wave of democratic backsliding, which goes to show that there's a bunch of countries right now that are voting for people that are actively dismantling democracies. And I guess the question is, well, if people are voting kind of against democracy, is that democratic? Is that the democratic system working towards authoritarianism?
I think it's really important that if we look at the BFV report again, it's not the reason that now the AfD is considered right-wing extremist endeavor is not because they're trying to build a different kind of democracy or because they have other ideas of how our democracy should work. It's because they're promoting this idea that we have first-class and second-class citizens. And that Muslims, for example, they just spread hate against certain groups of people because of their religion or because of their ethnicity. So is that a legitimate opinion, or is that just hate that needs to be stopped? Is a major question here. Yeah. So I think it's very different than just promoting like a different kind of electoral system, for example, right?
And then the other big question is, does banning the party stop that hate? Does it change the opinion of anyone who voted for it?
Yeah, one of the counter arguments to banning the AfD is that there's this fear that some of these people might just go underground. Like, at least now they're out in the public, we can see them. But what would actually happen if we ban them? We can't tell, right?
There was an activist that I interviewed at a demonstration who was pointing out, like, sure, they could go underground and that could, lead to different problems, but at least they wouldn't be getting public funding.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be in the parliament passing laws.
Right.
So
the public funding is actually, because now sometimes it seems like the discussion is all just about should we ban the party or not, which is a discussion that we need to have and that we are having, which I think is good. But there are also all kinds of other measures, right, that are now being discussed. And one of them is public funding, for example, for their foundations, is public funding for the party. It's should people, for example, who are politicians for the AfD and who are now considered right-wing extremists, should these members be able to hold public offices, like being a lawyer, being a police person, being a teacher? Can they actually be neutral in their day job if they apparently also try to promote hate on groups of citizens?
Let's talk about the process to ban them. There have been 2 motions briefly discussed and tabled for later before the election. From this point on, especially with this report out, what are the next steps in that direction? What would it look like if they were banned?
So there are 3 bodies that could potentially ask the court to look into this. It's the government, it's the Bundestag, so the parliament, with a simple majority, and it's the Bundesrat, which is the group of all the federal states. I think what's important if we look at the discussion is that none of these, it would not be the government or the parliament deciding with a vote, like, yeah, let's ban them. They would ask the court to then start a process to start looking into this. So they would start gathering evidence. I mean, the BFV report is part of this evidence, but they would need to go much further because the BFV report is really more about the mindset. It's more about the thinking of the AfD, whereas to ban a party, you would need to prove that they're actively working towards this. That they're not just promoting this idea, but that they are trying to really put it into action.
Let's imagine the motions were followed up on in this term at some point this year.
Yeah, we could say like maybe in autumn. Just hypothetically, the parliament would decide, we want the court to look into this. At this point, we have so much evidence. We do believe that there is very strong evidence that the AfD is actively working against our constitution. Then they would start gathering evidence, perhaps a year. Then it would be brought in front of the court, and then the court might take 2-3 years to decide. So the whole process, I mean, now is 2025, 2026, it might be up until 2028.
So there would even be more elections happening by then.
There might be another election until then.
If they find that the party should be banned, and if they rule in that direction, then there's another opportunity to appeal by the party at the European level, which has happened before in the case of the Communist Party. And I'm guessing the SPR also appealed.
And also for a bunch of other countries. So Germany is not the only country in Europe that has this possibility to ban parties. There's been a bunch of cases in Spain, Belgium, France, Turkey. Although Belgium, I think they didn't ban it, but they withdraw all the state funding, which essentially was the end of the party, as far as I know. And these have been brought in front of the European Court of Human Rights as well. So the European Court of Human Rights has decided on a few cases of party bans. And sometimes they ruled in favor, and sometimes they ruled that, no, this was not in line with the law.
Since the election, the AfD has grown even more popular. Now, depending on the poll, they're either roughly tied with the Christian Democrats or they're even more popular than the Christian Democrats.
Yeah.
Do you think the BFV had an impact on that since the declaration came out?
I'm not certain in terms of election polls. I do know that the BFV report came out, and immediately after there was another poll if people in the general public are in favor or against a party ban. And it dramatically increased the number of people who were in favor of bringing the AfD in front of the Constitutional Court to see if the party could be banned. And I've spoken to many people, also politicians, who said, it's not, if the court decides to rule against it, that's fine too, but perhaps we should at least try. We should ask the court to look into it and then draw a conclusion.
So we were talking about how NPD was too insignificant, and now people are arguing that AfD is too popular. Is it kind of too late to be having this conversation? Could there have been opportunities earlier, before this report came out, before some of the more, before the Potsdam meeting? Were there other moments where this conversation should have started, in your opinion?
I mean, the conversation was started. We did speak about this publicly before. The question is always, and this is really difficult to say for all of us, I think, is we don't know for certain what other information the intelligence office might hold. So there is this, we believe that there might be other secret sources that they have, other bits of information that have not been made public so far, but we don't know for sure. The evidence that needs to be brought in front of court is a lot. You need to prove that they're actively working against the Constitution. And that's really difficult to prove. So I think there's good reason this has taken a long time.
A week after the declaration was announced, the AfD had already sued the BFV, and there was this headline by Politico saying that the BFV walked back its determination.
Yeah, that was wrong.
Yeah. What is the dynamic right now? What did Politico get wrong, and what is the situation with that court case?
So that was to be expected. So that the AfD would sue the BFV for this report was expected. And then what happened was that the BFV agreed in front of the court that they would no longer publicly speak about the case until the court came to a first conclusion, which is in line with our legal system. So when Politico and other media published this headline that they walked back, I think they just got it completely wrong, because that's just part of our legal system, that the BFV would agree to no longer comment on the case, to do no further damage in case the court ruled that they could actually not say this publicly. It's to protect the rights of the AfD who's suing.
This has happened before. The AfD has been declared an extremist endeavor.
Oh yeah, they have all kinds of court cases going, right? The AfD on so many, in many states, they've declared either suspected or confirmed right-wing extremists, and they're always suing against us. And there are all kinds of court cases ongoing, which I think, and this needs to also be pointed out, is a good thing. They should have the right to always go to a court and ask the court to look into this independently. There needs to be a way to appeal these decisions.
There's also been within the party at the national level, but with Junge Alternative, with Die Flügel. Has the AfD ever won any of these cases after trying to sue the BFV for, defaming them, or I don't know exactly what they're suing them for.
Right.
For
it would not always be the BFV, because it would also be on the state level, like the corresponding institutions. I don't think they've ever won one of these cases. No, not that, as far as I know.
So the courts keep finding again and again that yes, indeed, the AfD is an extremist organization.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that covers it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.